I always thought living alone was a mark of independence, a way to prove I could handle the world on my own. That belief was shattered the night of December 14th, a night so ordinary it could have slipped by unnoticed. The evening began like any other, with the twilight breeze whispering through the barren branches of the trees outside my small rented house on the outskirts of town. I was curled up on my couch, wrapped in an old blanket, watching TV. The wind's howling seemed to grow more insistent, as if warning me of the horror that was about to unfold. It must have been around 9 p.m. when the first knock came. It was soft, barely audible over the sound of the television. Thinking it was just a branch or something trivial, I ignored it. The knock came again, this time louder, more urgent. I muted the TV, my heart beginning to race. Silence enveloped the room, except for the sound of my own breathing. "Who's there?" I called out, hoping my voice didn't betray my growing fear. No answer. I approached the front door hesitantly and peered through the peephole, but all I could see was the darkness stretching into the yard. I turned on the porch light. Still, nothing seemed amiss. Just as I began to turn away, convinced it was my imagination, I saw it, a shadow darting just out of the light's reach. A chill ran down my spine. I locked the door and checked all the windows, ensuring they were secured. The house suddenly felt too big, too full of dark corners. I retreated to the living room, trying to calm myself. "It's just some kids playing a prank," I muttered, not quite believing it myself. Then the power went out. The sudden darkness was suffocating. I fumbled in the drawer for a flashlight, my hands shaking. The beam of light seemed feeble in the engulfing blackness. I decided to head to bed, thinking sleep would offer an escape from the growing dread. As I lay in bed, straining my ears for any sound out of the ordinary, I heard footsteps, not the unmistakable sound of someone outside, but the creak of floorboards from the hallway inside my house. I froze, barely breathing. The footsteps were slow, deliberate. I grabbed my phone to call the police, but there was no signal. A storm, I remembered, could interfere with the reception. The footsteps stopped right outside my bedroom door. Then a soft, mocking tap against the wood. "Who's there?" I demanded, voice quivering. The tapping continued, growing louder, more insistent. I didn't dare move. The door began to creak open slowly, agonizingly slow. A figure stood in the doorway, a shadow against the faint light from the window behind it. It was tall, its features obscured by darkness. "What do you want?" I managed to choke out. The figure didn't move, didn't speak. Instead, it stepped forward into the light. The face was pale, almost ghostly, with hollow eyes that seemed to bore into my soul. It smiled, a grotesque, twisted smile that didn't reach those dark, empty eyes. "I just wanted to see who I was sharing the house with," it said in a raspy, whispering voice. I couldn't move, couldn't scream, couldn't think. The figure kept advancing, slowly, ever so slowly. I did the only thing I could think of. I threw the flashlight at it and bolted from the bed, rushing past it into the hallway. I didn't look back as I ran to the front door, yanking it open and sprinting into the night. The cold air hit me like a wall, but fear propelled me forward. I ran without direction, without purpose, until lights and voices guided me to the main road. A passing car stopped, and through my tears and incoherent words, the driver understood enough to call the police. The police found the back door of my house ajar. Inside, everything seemed normal, untouched. But in my room, on the pillow where my head had lain just moments before, was a knife, long and sharp, gleaming dully in the flashlight the police officer held. They never caught anyone. They said it might have been a drifter, moving on after toying with a lone resident. I couldn't stay there after that night. I moved back into the city, surrounded by the noise and light of hundreds of people. Sometimes, when the wind howls just right, I find myself listening for footsteps, for the soft tap-tap on the door. I don't think I'll ever feel truly alone again. And maybe, in a twisted way, that's exactly what my uninvited guest wanted. The small town of Oakwood was the kind of place where nothing ever seemed to happen, until it did. It was late autumn, and the trees lining our street were nearly bare, their skeletal branches casting eerie shadows through the windows of my parents' house where I was staying alone for the weekend. That Saturday evening, I settled in to catch up on some reading. The house creaked occasionally, a soundtrack so common I rarely noticed it anymore. Around 10 p.m., a more peculiar noise pierced the usual hum of quiet, the jarring clang of metal from the backyard. My heart jumped, and I set my book down, straining to hear more over the pounding of my own pulse. Silence returned, and I scolded myself for being jittery. It was probably just a raccoon rummaging through the bins, I reasoned. To ease my mind, I switched on the backyard lights, but saw nothing amiss from the kitchen window. Shrugging off the uneasy feeling, I turned off the light and headed back to the living room. Moments after I sat down, the noise came again, louder this time, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps. This wasn't any animal. Someone was outside. I grabbed my phone to dial 911, but stopped. What if it was just a neighbor's kid retrieving a lost ball? Calling the cops on a false alarm seemed like overkill. Deciding to take a quick look myself, I grabbed the heaviest flashlight I could find and unlocked the back door. The cool night air was unsettlingly still as I stepped outside, flashlight casting long, distorted shadows across the ground. My breath misted in the air, mingling with the faint smell of wet earth and decay. I walked cautiously towards the bins, my shoes crunching softly on the gravel. As I rounded the corner, the beam of my flashlight fell on something disturbingly out of place, a muddy boot print, much too large to belong to any child, imprinted near the bins. My stomach knotted. Whoever left it could still be nearby. Just then, a crashing sound erupted from the side of the house. Without thinking, I sprinted towards the noise. As I turned the corner, the flashlight beam caught a figure darting into the bushes. I stopped dead, my heart pounding in my ears. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice shaky. There was no response, just the rustling of leaves as the figure shifted in the darkness. I was about to step forward when my phone buzzed in my pocket, startling me. It was a text from my neighbor, Mr. Jacobs. "Are you okay? Saw someone in your yard. Called the police." Relief washed over me, followed swiftly by fear. I wasn't alone. I backed towards the house slowly, keeping my flashlight aimed at the bushes. Just as I reached the back door, I heard it. A low, menacing laugh, chillingly close. I bolted inside, locking the door behind me. Heart racing, I watched from the window. The figure emerged from the bushes, standing in the stark light from the back porch. He was tall and broad, wearing a dark hoodie that obscured his face. He stared right at me, then turned and walked slowly away, disappearing into the darkness. The police arrived minutes later, but they found no one. They suggested the intruder was likely scared off by their lights and sirens. They would patrol the area, they assured me, and advised me to keep the doors and windows locked. I didn't sleep that night, nor the next. Every shadow seemed to move, every noise a potential threat. The police never caught anyone, and nothing like that had happened since, but the fear lingered. Days turned into weeks, and life in Oakwood returned to its sleepy normalcy. Yet the shadow of that night haunted me. I could no longer shake the feeling of being watched, of being not quite alone, even in the comfort of my own home. That incident shattered the illusion of safety that small towns so often project. It reminded me that darkness lurks everywhere, even in places where everyone knows your name. Oakwood wasn't just a quiet town anymore. It was a place where unknown dangers could be hiding just beyond the flicker of your backyard light. It was a frigid January evening when I first heard the scratching. Living in the rural outskirts of a small New England town, I was accustomed to the sounds of nature, the howling winds, the occasional wildlife. But this was different. The scratching was persistent, deliberate, and it seemed to be coming from inside the walls of my old farmhouse. I had inherited the house from my late uncle, a reclusive man who had passed away some months earlier. The house was ancient, with creaking floors and drafty windows, a testament to the long and storied past of my family. I had moved in seeking peace after a tumultuous year, but peace was the last thing I found. The scratching started softly one night as I sat reading by the fire. At first, I dismissed it as the house settling or perhaps a trapped rodent, but as nights progressed, so did the intensity of the noise. It grew louder and more frantic, as if something or someone was trying to escape from within the very bones of the house. One night, The unsettling nature of the sound compelled me to investigate. I grabbed a flashlight and traced the noise to the living room wall. Placing my ear against the cold plaster, I could hear it more clearly. It wasn't just scratching, there was a tapping too, rhythmic and steady, like a coded message from the beyond. I stepped back, heart pounding, as a chilling draft swept through the room. Determined to find the source, I ventured into the basement where my uncle had spent much of his time. The air was thick with dust and the smell of mold. As I descended, the temperature dropped, and my breath became visible in the beam of my flashlight. The scratching grew louder as I approached an old wooden door in the far corner of the basement. A door I had never opened, one that my uncle had strictly told family members to avoid. I hesitated, my hand on the doorknob, the eerie sounds from the other side making my skin crawl. With a deep breath, I turned the knob and pushed the door open. The room beyond was pitch black, colder even than the rest of the basement. I stepped inside, my flashlight cutting through the darkness. The room was empty except for an old desk and chair, and walls covered in what looked like old, peeling wallpaper. But as my light swept across the wall, I realized it wasn't wallpaper, but dozens of old letters, pasted and overlapping, yellowed with age. The scratching had stopped. All was silent now except for my own breathing. I approached the wall, curiosity overtaking my fear, and peeled one of the letters from the surface. It was dated over a century ago, addressed to my great-great-grandfather. As I read, a story of grief and betrayal unfolded, a family secret long buried. The letter spoke of a hidden sin, an injustice done to a young woman who had vanished without a trace, her fate unknown to all but my ancestor. I felt a chill run down my spine as the air stirred around me, the silence in the room suddenly oppressive. I turned to leave, but in the corner of the room, my flashlight reflected off something metallic. It was a small old key, partially buried under the dirt floor. I picked it up, examining it. The key was ornate, heavy, clearly meant for a significant lock. My eyes scanned the room and landed on the desk. In the dim light, I could now see that one of the drawers had a lock. Trembling, I inserted the key. It fit perfectly. As I opened the drawer, the scratching sound resumed, louder now, frantic. Inside the drawer was another letter, this one unmarked, but the handwriting was unmistakable. It matched the letter from the wall. As I read the contents of the letter, the temperature around me plummeted. The letter was a confession written by my great-great-grandfather, admitting to the wrongful accusation and subsequent punishment of the young woman who had been his servant. He had blamed her for a theft she did not commit, and in a fit of rage, had locked her in this very room where she ultimately perished. The scratching intensified, then abruptly stopped as I finished reading. A sob caught in my throat as the reality of the situation washed over me. The noise, the cold, the feeling of being watched, it all made sense now. The spirit of the wronged woman was still here, trapped within these walls, her pain echoing through the years. I left the room quickly, locking the door behind me, the key now burning in my pocket. As I ascended the basement stairs, the air gradually warmed, the oppressive feeling lifting slightly. But the weight of my family's dark past lingered, a tangible presence in the dusty shadows of the old farmhouse. I could not live there after that night. I moved out the following week, but the memory of that discovery haunts me still. I left the key in the desk, hoping it might offer some solace to the restless spirit confined within that forsaken room. My nights are quieter now, but sometimes when the wind howls just right, I swear I can hear the faint scratching of someone trying to tell their story.